Hello. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. I really appreciate you agreeing to set up at this kind of hour at night. So, Daniel, you reached out to Street Epistemology, which is an organization that I work with, and said that you wanted to participate in the discussion, and I gladly took that on because you and we've chatted in the past. You seem like a person who is very interested in discussing ideas, and that's something that I can live with all day. Um, and I'm excited to chat with you. You are uh, you're an author. You wrote the. Tell me a little bit about yourself, actually.
Okay, so I work for Watchman Fellowship in Arlington, Texas. We are an interfaith evangelism ministry that reaches out to atheists, agnostics, skeptics, Hindus, Buddhists, Muslim. We dialogue with people that of other non-Christian worldviews. The ministry's been around for 30 years. I've been a part of it for 4. I have 2 podcasts that I do with Watchman Fellowship, Good Heavens and Apologetics Profile. And I'm a co-author, co-editor to the 2019 book, The Story of the Cosmos with philosopher Dr. Paul Gould. It came out in 2019, and I love exploring the relationship of science and faith, especially cosmology and astronomy. Mm-hmm. And I've been a Christian for over 30 years now, 30 years this year, and I am a part of 2 atheist book clubs. We run one with our ministry, the Atheist and Christian Book Club, right here on YouTube, and I'm also a part of a live and in-person dinner and book conversation with an all-atheist group here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as well. And next month, we're going to be talking about Tarzan. So we read a lot of cool books and have a lot of cool discussions, but I am knee-deep in other worldviews. That's what I do for a living. I go to Utah twice a year to talk to Mormons, and I love my job, love what I do, and this is part of the interaction. And my reaching out to you, David, to the community there was a lull there. I wasn't involved with, really wasn't getting into SE for a while because I had so much on my plate. And I just took a step back and took a breather, took a break from it, and had some time now in between my projects. It's feast or famine with my job. And I thought I'd reach out to somebody, anyone in the SE community for a chat about whatever. So here I am. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for joining me here. You I love the fact that you're talking to people, and I love the fact that you eat dinner with people. That's my kind of interaction right there. If there's ever an occasion I can have dinner with people and talk about ideas, I'm in heaven there.
You'd like our book club? It's fun. It's fun. I'm the only Christian in that club.
And that's the kind of stuff that interests me. That's one of the reasons you sent me an email that said, I want you to know that I'm open to discussing any topic, and that it can be about anything you choose. I'm not trying to push anything, and I want to hear about your experience and about your the things that led you to Christianity and how we can understand Christianity too, because you're steeped so well in the discussion of going from someone who doesn't believe to believes. And I mean, that's something that my channel is all about, is understanding the process of how someone gets from point A to point B in that regard, or point B to point A, even if there's something that doesn't work. And so what you may have seen part of my channel, but I'll just give you an overview. This is 2-day David. He was born yesterday. He somehow knows how to talk and understand logic and all the fun stuff like that. Science is neat, I guess. But he doesn't have past experiences. He doesn't have an upbringing. He doesn't have things to compare things to. And so we're starting fresh with ideas with this guy. And what I'm going around is I'm asking people what they think, what they believe, what they wish more people thought or believed, and trying to understand the process there. Maybe we can all understand each other a little better. Maybe we can have people who come on different camps think about how the other person's coming to their conclusion instead of just focusing on, well, that person is a bad person because they're on the other camp. And maybe we can understand each other's motivations a little better. That's my goals with my channel. And while I walk around like a crazy person with a picture of myself every week or so. So
Cool.
yeah, thanks. The let's let's begin on that. Like, so Christianity. David here, born yesterday, doesn't have any sort of reference for this. How in the world would him just existing, what do you think would lead him to that belief?
Since I'm unfamiliar with your fascinating thought experiment there, for my own background knowledge, so that I can better
Sure.
couch my responses to today there,
Sure.
how would you explain, in a nutshell, how would you explain your own deconversion experience to him? And then if I can hear how you might do that, then I can kind of couch my reference, have a reference for how I might explain Christianity to him.
Well, that's an interesting response. Let me think about that for a second. So I would say, David, I spent many years believing a lot of things, and over time, I came to conclusions that my reasonings weren't um, holding up to the skepticism that I came about it, and I decided to withhold belief until I found better evidence. So that's just vague and stuff. He doesn't know the history of anything like that. So what I'm trying to say is, like, how do we start from square one? Like, if you were to see somebody like David here who has no experiences, what in the world would lead him to think that in this life, maybe we should do it like this? How would you define Christianity?
Okay, so I want to be spot on with how kind of how you want me to do it. So if I give you an answer and you say, "Well, David today wouldn't understand that," just
Sure.
stop me.
Yeah.
So based on what limited knowledge you've given me, I can kind of couch it. And if you want to back up and say he doesn't get that,
Sure.
I'll be happy to try to define my terms in however sense I can. So do you want my testimony, or just a general overview of Christianity?
So I guess it kind of I guess what it means is, let's define Christianity before we talk about how to get there, and so maybe we
Okay,
can understand what we're trying to get to.
sure. I'll give you a 60-second nugget,
Sure.
and then you can unpack that. But I figured since David was born yesterday, he probably wants things in small bites. So
Yeah.
this is about as small a bite as I could do it. But you're free to ask me anything about it. So in a nutshell, uh, a being created this world. A supernatural being named God created the world in which we inhabit. It was good, and he created human beings and gave them a simple command, a couple of simple commands, one of which they disobeyed, which resulted in a tragedy that brought about sin, death, disease, sorrow, and suffering. And so the world is eminently good, but something has gone terribly wrong with the world because of the transgression of the first human beings. Instead of remaining aloof, God comes down into our tragedy and suffering and appears to us as one of us in order to explain what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how he is going to save us from that evil that ensnares us, whether it's moral evil inside of us, the transgression of what is good, or natural disasters. How can we be saved and overcome the world and all of its problems? And so God comes to us, the being that created the world, comes to us in flesh, explains to us what happened and what he plans to do. And as a result, the salvation, if you will, from evil and suffering is accomplished through what God did in human flesh, in that he was put to death for the transgression of the original couple and all other transgressions that ensued from humanity. He took the vicarious penalty of the death penalty for the breaking of God's commandments.
Yeah.
And he lived in perfect harmony with the original commands. And so he's the only human being that lived as God intended human beings to live. And so he transfers that perfect moral righteousness to us, as well as taking the death penalty for sin from us. And that enables anyone who wants to receive that offer of forgiveness to have eternal life with God. In a new heavens and a new earth, he will recreate the world.
So let's say David walks out his front door. It's the second day on earth. And one of the first things you mentioned there is that that there's like a beginning, a creator of all things. Is that something that can be, that is, how would he come to that conclusion?
Well, I think the simple one-word answer is through suffering.
Maybe I could use a few more words.
Okay. Try to keep it simple. As any human being will experience suffering in this world, suffering tends to purge us of what is not important, or of what we used to think was important. And so through suffering and our encountering the world as it is, and I speak in terms of the physical world, we begin to see patterns. Some people do, some people don't. Why that is, I don't know. But throughout the course of life, of our suffering, we begin to see patterns emerge. And one of the most fascinating patterns that I have seen in my adult life, it's taken time to see it and time to understand it, is the nature of the universe itself. At the very smallest level today, there is these little things called atoms, very, very tiny structures, like magic Lego. Maybe as a child, you've encountered Legos, maybe. I don't know if you've seen Legos yet. But these Legos are made up of smaller Legos. There's protons and neutrons and electrons and quarks. These are all the components of what this thing is called the atom, the smallest unit of matter. Well, it's not the smallest. It's comprised of other things. The atom is what makes up all of our bodies. There's carbon atoms and nitrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. So the atom is a fascinating structure. Without the atom, we don't have planets and stars and grass and trees and the front porch that you just walked out onto. That's all comprised of various different kinds of atoms. And in the heart of the atom are quarks. Quarks make up the proton and the neutron. The proton and the neutron are the central heart, the nucleus of the atom. And on the outside of the proton and neutron are the electrons. Now, if you know who Niels Bohr is, Niels Bohr pictured the atom as a kind of miniature solar system with the sun at the center and little planets going around it. That's since been disproven by quantum mechanics to be very complicated, but you'll catch up to this today at some point if this fascinates you. There's plenty of research out there that you can look at.
Yeah.
And but the electrons are held together by the electromagnetic force, and they are layers of electrons at certain energy levels. And when an electron jumps down an energy level, it releases a photon, light. And when an electron absorbs a photon, it goes up an energy level. And this is the basis for all life that we have, is light. Light is the basis from which everything else comes. The colors, everything that you see right now on your screen, on the paint on the walls, your shirt color, the sunlight, the light above me, all of this come from photons, which are emitted by electrons in the atom. So this is a fascinating. This is just one detail of why I think the universe is designed and is pointed to somebody who arranged all of that. It is truly fascinating. And in the atom itself are three fundamental known forces in all of physics: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and then the big force of gravity. All of that, to me, bespeaks of design.
I love it.
Is that too many words?
You
Is that
love
too many words?
astronomy, and I respect that. I understand that
Sorry,
stuff is interesting and exciting. Um,
maybe over David's head. I don't know.
yeah, he's still
Sorry.
learning a bit of that.
Okay. Well, let me break it down any more if you want. I can. But that's one
So
way. When you study
you're
the
saying
physical
that
world, you see things like that.
you're saying that the world is incredible, that there's just very intricate layers to how things work, and
Mhm.
you're thinking because of that there has to be some kind of creator, and because there is some kind of creator, how did you get to some kind of perfectness and then fall, and then like that? I'm trying to figure out how he could be in the middle, he could walk out of his door and come to this conclusion of it, or if
Well, he's not going to come to the conclusion there on the front porch. It's going to take time and a lifetime of learning. I didn't learn all of that stuff. I learned all that stuff as an adult. It took me years to understand it, but I loved it. I was reading science books when I was a child, and even now, I have a very limited understanding of what it all means. But through experience, um, you begin to piece these things together. As I said before, some people see patterns in this world, and some people Some people don't. Some people think the patterns that I see are just illusory, that they're not real. But when I experience suffering and evil, there are things that are purged from my experiences that I once believed or held dear. Because when you go through difficulties, as you will in life today, they will make you see what is important. If you really want to know what someone believes, watch them as they suffer, and you will begin to see patterns emerge from human suffering. Because the one thing that has been resplendently clear to me in my 30 years as a Christian and my 55 years of living is that those who have suffered and survived attest to the goodness of life. You speak of evil, and how can we connect a perfect God with an evil world, or a world that is filled with evil and suffering? And I think that people who survive and live through the suffering attest to the fact that the goodness in this world is far and away superior to whatever evil and suffering may exist. And this has been my life lesson in the loss and
sure.
suffering that I've encountered. So I don't have
Do
all
you?
the answers to the mystery of a
Yeah,
perfect God in an evil world, but
sure.
this is how I've made my abductive
Yeah.
argument for my own self and justification.
Do you think so? Like, if you didn't know about the intricates of the cosmos and the astronomy, if you didn't know about the quarks and the neutrons, you would still believe in Christianity.
Oh yes, I became a Christian before I had any understanding of the intricacies of cosmology and physics. Absolutely.
Do you
Yeah.
think you could still believe it if you didn't know, like you didn't have the years of observation of the patterns of suffering and things that you're describing there?
Well, my Christianity began um, somewhat inexplicably 30 years ago, David. I was not, like yourself, I had a fairly nice existence. Life seemed pretty rosy. I had a girlfriend, a nice job. I lived in California in a house that I was renting, and everything was kind of cool. I was on my front porch, then things wasn't looking for God. And, I kind of made fun of people that believed in God when I was 25.
Hmm.
And then over the course of about 6 months, I can only describe it as God gently revealing himself to me,
Hmm.
like the light of dawn. That my experience in understanding who Jesus was is, it's very difficult for me to, and I think it's difficult for a lot of Christians, to step outside of my own head and look at the big picture of how God got in here
Yeah.
and changed my mind. Because at some level, I can explain it to you in philosophical and epistemological terminology. But
Hmm.
at another level, I need poetry. if you've ever seen the movie Contact, maybe you should go see the movie Contact today. It's a fantastic movie. I recommend it. Carl Sagan. You'll meet him at some point in your experience. Cool. But Jodie Foster travels through a wormhole to another galaxy, and she gets out of her little ship and she sees this beauty, and she's smitten by it. And her words are, "They should have sent a poet." And so at one level, I can explain to you the philosophical and epistemological reasoning and logic that I used in trying to understand what was happening to me. But in another sense, I need poetry to explain the interrelational, emotional component to my transformation that led to my baptism sometime 6 months or so after I began to understand that Jesus was a real person. But I can't give you, I can explain it philosophically, but there's still something that's going to be missing even from my own explanation that is, as a lot of people do, just have a transcendental experience that is kind of beyond words to some degree. I mean, it's not completely beyond words, but words fail.
Yeah, and that's and the goal is to find as many words as possible, and that's part of my prerogative. And so, like, let's say hypothetically, David earlier today was talking to like a Muslim, and the Muslim told David that God revealed himself to me 30 years ago, and I just knew it's what led me to Allah. If God revealed himself to David, today David here, how would he know what it was, what it meant, and that it was the Christian God?
So does David have a background understanding? It seems like he doesn't have enough of an understanding to compare Islam to Christianity from what you've told me.
Yeah.
So if I were to encourage him to
have the same conversation with a Muslim, how would he know how to tell the difference between what they're saying and what you're saying?
Well, he'd have to get off the front porch and do a little investigating. I don't have a formula, David. I can tell you systematically what's wrong, what I think is wrong with Islam, but I'm not sure that David, being in the state that he is ready for all that. But if I were to tell somebody that has a background with Islam and Christianity, the distinctive difference between there's a fundamental amount of distinctive differences between Islam and Christianity.
Yeah, sure. I think that's taking it in the wrong direction there.
But that's
like hypothetical religion that you don't know the ins and outs of, that just religion X that seemingly has very similar to Christian logic, but it's slightly different.
I would have to know something about it, wouldn't I? I would have to know something about this religion.
I guess what I'm wanting to know is more of your experience. Like, what?
Well, my experience involves actually digging into Islam and finding out where it differs with Christianity.
Islam.
That's what I did. I mean, if that's the answer that I have, I mean, that's what I did. So that's what I would tell anybody to do if they wanted to, is to weigh them in the balance and look at the claims and read their books, talk to Muslims, as I have.
Right.
And dive into that. I don't know of another way to do it other than if you want to know the difference.
Let's refocus the question here. What do you mean when you say it was revealed to you? And do you think that's something that happens to everyone to believe this belief, or just to some?
Well, I wouldn't know anything about you or Today David unless you told me.
Sure.
It's not, I don't mean to overcomplicate it. God is a relational and communicative being, and he can tell people he exists. So I don't think there's anything unnatural about a God who is a communicative being, who creates people, who wouldn't communicate himself. And so distinctively, I think over time, God does reveal himself to people in a myriad of different ways. He uses means, he uses anything to reveal himself. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's instantaneous, but that is exactly how the scripture is called revelation. God reveals himself through what he has made and what he has written, and he also reveals himself through the person of Christ. So that's how we get to know anybody, is through them personally revealing themselves to me or to anyone. That I wouldn't know anything about you unless you told me. And so that's the simple basic premise of it, is that God is a revealing God. He shares with us who he is.
What does it look like whenever he reveals himself? At least from your experience or your guess.
Well, working at Watchman has given me this distinctive understanding of God's revelation. It seems that all that we study hundreds of cults and non-Christian religions, New Age ideology, spiritual practices and doctrines, things that are non-Christian, that we try to equip the church in understanding them. A majority of these groups, David, have something to say about Jesus of Nazareth. That's a really interesting fact. I'll give you one specific example. There are 4 or 5 active, fairly active UFO cults in the United States today. They all take as their Bible, if you will, the Urantia book. Now, this was allegedly communicated to an individual several decades ago through the medium of what they call automatic writing. And the UFO groups believe that this man was channeling the voice and the communications of alien beings. And you can get the Urantia book online. It's available for free. There's nothing secret about it. It's a 4,000-page tome. But 1/3 of it is spent denying the divinity and teachings of Jesus. And so you have to ask yourself, why would aliens from a distant universe or galaxy or star or planet be interested in an itinerant Jewish rabbi who lived 2,000 years ago in a Providence far and away removed from our own culture and time? Why would aliens be interested in Jesus? What's going on there? I don't know. Muslims acknowledge Jesus as a prophet.
Are you saying that we're assuming that potentially that's a man-made book is what you're saying? It's just that it's.
I've just described to you how I know it was.
Started talking about Jesus.
I'm not making the claim that it was just a guy's fantasy book. He was sitting in his bedroom and writing it. I do think there was some kind of communication going on. That the form, if you look into automatic writing, what that is. So I'm not saying it was or it wasn't, man's imagination. I'm just saying this is how it was transcribed. This is common knowledge of how it was transcribed. Mm-hmm. Why would an individual spend 1,030-300 pages trying to deny who Jesus is? It's very interesting. My point in all of that is that, the Branch Davidians in Waco 30 years ago, Jim Jones, Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, you name a religious group or a cult, and I will find that in all of their doctrine, they will have a statement about who they think Jesus is. So there's a tremendous interest in this person, Jesus of Nazareth. And that's what I find compelling, fascinating, affirming for me, is that the world seems to be caught up in, still 2,000 years later, talking about a itinerary Jewish rabbi from a lowly Roman Providence 2,000 years ago. Why are we still talking about him? It's because of the claims he made and what happened. Christianity says that he resurrected.
Were any of these writings before Jesus came around, or are they all after?
Islam.
Cultural impact.
Islam was 600 years after Christianity. Judaism had been around a couple thousand years before Jesus, but prophesied of the Messiah. There's overlapping prophecies there. There are some ancient writings that predate Christianity, but God predates all of human writing. So it's just a matter of when the scriptures were recorded. Doesn't mean that God began to exist when Moses started writing, but that God predates all of these in some sense. And so the ideas that we're talking about are ones that have come since the advent of Christianity. There are a lot of cults that claim allegiance back to other religions and practices long before Jesus, in Egyptian society and things of that nature. But We are talking about the man from Nazareth. So I would encourage today, David, to look into who the person of Jesus of Nazareth is. Start there. There's no harm in it. He's still
And
talked about today, you know.
how would he go about doing that?
Well, you could.
Why would he be so? Historically, some people have talked about Jesus and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I mean, what would he do to learn about it? Let's just go ahead.
Well, what would anybody do if they're interested in finding out who Jesus is? You go to the source. The most common, widely known source of Jesus is the Gospels and the New Testament.
And why is that the source?
Well, that's what began Christianity. The narratives in the Gospels and the New Testament give us the historical source of what happened and why Christianity began, where it did, and when it did.
Just I'd like to take a second to think real quick. I don't want to just spit out stuff here. So all these things you're saying about God, about man's condition, about fall, about redemption, so like all this is in the Bible. Why should someone take the Bible as an authority of some kind of truth?
Well, in John 18:38, I don't know how familiar you are with the story. Sometimes I feel like am I talking to you, David, or the cardboard David? I don't know.
I'm like a mediator.
Well, in John 18:38, Jesus is on trial. He's been brought to the Roman curator, Pontius Pilate. Pilate has been historically verified by an inscription that has been found, archaeologically speaking. Now, I'm not saying any of this makes Christianity true or is proof of the truth of Christianity. My arguments are what I would call a cumulative case, like a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, where all the pieces start falling into place. Pilate is but one of them. So he was the Roman curator of the Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem for Rome. He was the governor of Judea. Mm-hmm. And the Jews bring Jesus to Pilate. Pilate can't find any fault with him. He tries him. He asks him questions. The Jews want to crucify Jesus because Jesus has made himself equal with God, which is blasphemy in the Jewish first century temple Judaism. No man comes to earth and says, I'm God, or I'm the Son of God. This term was directly understood by the Jews of Jesus's day to say that Jesus was making himself equal with God. This was odious to the ears of first century Jews in the temple. And so they brought him to the Roman governor and they said, we want to crucify him. Now, Pilate wasn't religious. His interests were only political. He says,
why do you think that they didn't believe, if Jesus is God, as you're describing, why don't you think they believed it when he was right there and could prove it?
Well, because the people to whom Jesus came, the Israelites, with the Old Testament history, is all about the God's chosen people, the Jewish nation, the nation of Israel, the people, the descendants, the physical, biological descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and from Jacob's children came the 12 tribes of Israel, which made up the nation of Israel. And the story in the Old Testament is God's faithfulness to his unfaithful people. And so by the time God comes down in flesh, in a body, as Jesus, to his own people, they reject him and crucify him. Their unbelief is worse than it was in the Old Testament. So they don't believe him. They're steeped in unbelief. But this is the beginning of God revealing himself not only just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, the other non-Jewish nations. So the Jewish people that God came to didn't believe him. They have a track record of not believing God. So his own people reject him, send him to Rome for crucifixion. Pilate says, I find no fault with him. But in that dialogue with Pilate, Jesus says, those who hear my voice shall know the truth, And Pilate asks Jesus, what is truth? A fabulous question. Pilate was nervous, afraid of Jesus to some degree, and did not want Jesus to be crucified. But in the end, Pilate was more afraid of Caesar and losing his position as governor than he was of Jesus and what Jesus was saying. And
Trying to
so he had
understand
Jesus.
this just a little bit. He says, "Those who hear my voice will know the truth." I mean,
Correct.
isn't he telling those people that he's God and they're not believing him? They're hearing his voice
That's right.
and they don't know it, and they're
That's
fearing
correct.
other people.
That's
It's
correct.
like, and you're
That's
saying that
the
this
this
2,000 years ago. What if
Mhm.
if they're skeptical then? How is it more apparent now than it was when he was physically there?
Well, I'm not claiming it's more apparent. I'm simply saying that unbelief is an epistemic starting point for humanity. That it's not just Jewish people who don't believe. It is we who are, because of sin, unbelief is the default, if you will, the tragic default of our fall into sin, that we don't want anything to do with God. No one seeks God, as Romans 3 says, Paul's epistle to the Romans. No one seeks God. It is, in fact, the distinctive difference between Christianity and all other religions, including Islam, that in other religions and cults, David, man tries to build a way to God. In Christianity, it is God who takes the initiative to come to man, because man won't, on his own, turn to the living God and be saved. Jesus, God, comes to us and saves us and takes the initiative to save us despite our unbelief. So unbelief is the standard, not a good one, but it's the standard fare for humanity in terms of their knowledge and understanding. John's gospel begins with, the light shines in the darkness, the light of Christ, but the darkness did not comprehend it, didn't understand it. And then it goes on to say in the same chapter that God made the world, but the world didn't know who he was. And so there he was in Pilate's praetorium, on the pavement, being judged by Pilate, being judged by his own people, and sent to the cross because the Jews didn't believe and thought he was blaspheming. And it's tragic, but that's what happened. But God, through the evil of human beings, God works out human redemption through Jesus's going to the cross, that he takes our evil and makes good come out of it. That's why Christians call the crucifixion Friday Good Friday. It's not, yay, Jesus died. It's, my gosh, how horrific, but how good, how terribly good.
If let's say you or today David were put back in time and put right there, and you didn't know about Christianity, you just imagine you were one of those people. You were one of the Jews, or you were Pilate, or you were one of the people who did believe. What do you think separated the people who didn't believe and the people who did? Like, what could David consider that would make him more likely to end up in the camp at which he understood correctly?
Suffering. God basically picks the idiots of the world and says to a watching, unbelieving world, watch how my children die.
Can you give a more can you give a current example of what you mean? Like, can you give me the poetic view of what that looks like today?
Well, you're familiar with the concept of sacrifice, correct?
Sure. Yeah. I was telling you about that.
Where is sacrifice most prevalent in our culture today?
Probably parents.
Parents, men and women who served in the military.
That's a big one.
I was in the Army for 4 years as a public affairs specialist for the 101st Airborne Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Our office dealt with soldier deaths almost daily.
Sure.
I videotaped soldier funerals. I made videos for the families of the deceased. I interviewed soldiers. I heard stories of soldiers, whether it's in wartime or peacetime or training, where soldiers die from a tragic accident or something in combat. But every once in a while, you hear the story of a soldier who willingly leapt on a grenade for his buddies or took a bullet or something
Yeah.
for the sake of his team. And there's no greater experience that I've encountered. I've never been a parent, so obviously there's sacrificial love there as well. But those kind of stories are the ones that I've experienced are the most powerful and the most moving. That these people died for the love of their country, people they don't even know, but for their friends, and they made the ultimate sacrifice, and they are honored because of it. It's the highest honor, and they get the highest military honors for what they did, of course, posthumously. But this is impressive. What causes a human being to do that? What kind of love is it that a man would lay down his life for his friends? That is what I'm talking about. Watch how these people die. That in the martyrio, I'm not pronouncing the Greek word right, but that's the Greek word for witness. It doesn't mean you have to die. But in the early church, the first century forward, Christians were hated and vilified and persecuted. And they were, the Greco-Roman world watched how Christians died. And that martyrdom, as has often been said in the history of Christianity, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And a lot of times the love that was displayed in the lives of believers who were persecuted and killed was powerful enough to convert eventually a Roman emperor. But it's not just the Roman emperor. That's how Christianity grew. What kind of love is this that would let people die in such peace with such love and sacrifice? They were emulating their Lord and Savior. And I think that is I'm not saying it's the definitive thing, but you asked me what it looked like in the first century. That's what I think it looked like.
Sure. And thanks for sharing. And but the Jews who were there, and the regular citizens that were there, and Pilate, was watching that sacrifice firsthand.
Right.
I mean, maybe they were. I guess you could say they were misinterpreting it. But and then, as someone said in the comments there, I mean, plenty of people in Islam make sacrifices for their fellow man and for their beliefs and stuff like that. I'm just wondering if that helps us get a little closer to understanding how you could be one of the people who got it versus someone who didn't.
Well, the ultimate, number one, let me clarify, I'm not saying that sacrifice makes Christianity true or even makes
I'm
it
saying if it's a tool. Yeah.
I'm not even saying that I'm not saying that it proves what I'm saying is true, or that it was attractive to everybody, because obviously people killed Christians and were completely fine with that. I mean, the Apostle Paul, before he was Paul, he was a murderous Jewish Pharisee who killed Christians. And then suddenly he encounters Jesus and he begins preaching Christianity. Likely the disciples are a little suspicious, I would imagine. This guy was killing Christians and now he's proclaiming Christianity. Anyway, I'm not saying that martyrdom, you asked me what it looked like in the first century. That was all.
Yeah. I'm not trying to hold you to the fire and say, I mean, this is what you're saying it is. What I'm trying to understand is, like, is that a tool that kind of help us, that maybe it could be a cumulative tool to help us kind of be on the more probability chance of being more open to being on the side that understands it, to being one of the people who gets it.
Well, I think what's misguided, David, if I may say so, in the most humblest of ways, is the search for the tool, the method, a tool, or a method by which we can apprehend the God of the universe. Now, in my opinion, as a Christian of 30 years, what I think this language comes from is a couple of centuries of the Enlightenment philosophy that has championed secularism in science, where we've gotten so accustomed to tools and technology and devices, and we can build rockets and satellites and telescopes and computers and have this wonderful technology we're sharing right now, that we are a culture that is steeped in a technological understanding of our reality. Okay, it's like asking a fish, what's water, right? We are so technologically minded that the only way we can see in apprehending truth is through the building or the use or the application of tools and technology. So a biblical example to say what, to undergird what I'm saying, are you familiar, you're translating, so the story of the Tower of Babel, whether you believe it or not, what is that story? Well, man decides to make mud bricks, make a tower into the heavens to make a name for himself. And he doesn't want to be scattered abroad on the whole earth, but the whole idea is that man is building something to attain heaven on his own, to make a name for himself. Okay, so this is the spirit of the age in which we live. What tool or technology can I use to attain heaven, to have a knowledge of God? What method can I ascribe to bringing God down to me so that I can have the knowledge of God for myself? And I'm here to tell you that there's no tool, there's no method, there's no system that's going to give you the kind of knowledge that you're asking for. I didn't use a singular method or a tool to know that Jesus is the Lord. I don't. And I have an astrophysicist friend who came to Christ. She had been an atheist all of her life. She was walking across the campus in Southern California one day, and she realized in an epiphany that God was the reason for the universe. She had not been thinking about that. And it struck her at that moment. And I think a lot of times that when people convert to Christianity as an adult, as I did, the actual moment of conversion is something of a mystery even to the person. I would be lying to you if I said there was one singular tool or method that I used to arrive at a knowledge of who Christ is. So I think the pursuit of a tool or a method is misguided, because it's kind of reductionistic in a modern sense, that I can have this 3-step process to understand the God of the universe. And it's usually not the case.
Let me give you a little perspective of why I'm using that kind of language. And I hear what you're saying. And I agree. It is not something you can just oversimplify into you do this, you get this kind of thing. The life is complicated. But like earlier, you're saying in Christianity, there's a fallen nature and a consequence for a fallen nature and sin and potential punishment. So the desire to not be in that camp, to not be punished, to not stay in that sin nature or something, could be a reason that people would want some kind of tool. They'd want to understand, they want to know. And there are millions and millions of people who are born in other religions who you say, because you're saying that it's like it's not something you can kind of really quantify, or not something you can like make grounded into one thing. But you're also saying words like, God revealed himself. And so that is grounding it. That is kind of taking it to a singular thing that you recognized and interpreted and understood somehow. And so if other people around the world are saying God revealed and it's different, and you're saying God revealed and it's this, like, I want to know like how somebody who grows up in an Islam country can know how to get there. And I'm not saying that you have all the answers for everything. This is not like some kind of bash on you or anything like that. I'm wondering, just in your experience as someone who has lived this for many years, who has talked to many different people of many different walks of faith and stuff like that, like what is it that you look for? What is it that you think about? How can someone who doesn't believe, what does the reveal look like, or feel like, or sound like? Something in that regard.
Well, do you want me to go with the example? You said a lot of things there. Would you like me to use the example of Islam?
If it's just
you mentioned it.
If it's just
you
about
mentioned
critiquing
Muslims.
the things that they got wrong, that's I'm not really interested in that. If it's about understanding what is right, that's what I'd like to talk about, if that makes sense.
Okay, but I just want to be clear. If you want, you mentioned Islam, and I can speak on that in relation to the question you're asking, if you want me to do that. If not, I won't.
So it's I'm trying to
I lived in
think
a
of an
Muslim
analogy.
country. I lived in a Muslim country for 6 months, so I have a lot of
Yeah.
background with that. I can tell you exactly what revelation to Muslims look like right now, if you want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I'll bite on that. Let's hear that. It sounds interesting.
Okay, so right now in many Muslim countries, Jesus is appearing to Muslims out of the blue in dreams, and Muslims are becoming Christians. No missionary work, no missionaries, no westernized Christians going over there doing mission work. There are, but there are a multitude of Muslims. You can look up this phenomenon online of Muslims becoming Christians through dreams of Christ. Now, I don't know what their dreams are specifically, but suddenly they go from a radical Islam to Christianity because of a series of dreams they've had about Jesus. Now, in Islam, in Muslim countries, Christianity is illegal. And Muslims are wonderful, sweet people. The ones that I talked to and lived with and worked with for 6 months, they're fantastic people. They love to have conversations and tea. But like all of us, they're very entrenched in their beliefs. And how does a man like myself or a Muslim, I consider myself a very stubborn, stiff-necked, hard-hearted person. I didn't believe, and suddenly I did. How does a Muslim go from wanting to kill people who are not Muslims? And that, by the way, in terms of sacrifice in Islam, if you sacrifice yourself against the infidel, you get heaven instantly. So their sacrifice involves harming other people, involves putting to death the infidel, people they think are not Islam or Muslims. They're not devoted, they're not devout. And so there's a radical sect of Islam, like Osama bin Laden, who take upon themselves to sacrifice themselves to kill the infidels. So how does one go from killing Christians to believing in Christianity? David, it is a miraculous. It is not anything that man does. It is God revealing himself to those people as those people need to see God. And I don't have all the answers for how that is. It varies from person to person. My conversion experience was very gentle. Some are very violent. Some come through drugs and alcohol abuse. Some come from horrible stories. My conversion, nobody'd make a movie out of it. It's very boring. It took 6 months. I read the Bible, and then I got baptized. It's different for everybody, but it's the same Jesus that is revealing himself to people. So some people have lights, camera, action. Some people just have this really boring, hey, one day I woke up and I wasn't a Christian, and I went to bed and I was a Christian. The conversion of C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you know who C.S. Lewis is. He was a literary scholar.
Yeah.
He got into the sidecar of his brother's motorcycle, and they went to the Whipsnade Zoo. I think it's in London or Oxford. And by the time Lewis got there and he was in the garden of the zoo, he saw the beauty of the garden, and instantly, in a moment, he decided that Christianity was true. Now, he's a literary scholar, an academic. How do we explain epistemically his conversion? Gets in the motorcycle, he's not a Christian. He gets to the zoo, he is. Looks around and sees all the beauty of the universe and the world and the sunshine and the bluebells and the birds and the animals. And he decides that Jesus is Lord. This is like my astrophysicist friend Sarah walking across a beautiful campus on a sunny day. And she thinks that God is the reason for the universe. What are these things? These are epiphanies that kind of define and escape, completely escape the capability of language, that we can't finally describe it in words exactly what's happening to us. Like I said earlier, I can't get out of my head and look exactly and see how God is working in my life. So again, when I keep getting back to, I've said it 3 times very simply, suffering. That has been the thing that has hammered Christianity into my soul, is suffering. It doesn't work for everybody. It sends people running for the door sometimes too. Nothing that I'm saying is a guarantee that you're going to become a Christian. But you have to seek it out through trial and tribulation. And what I basically say is plant your flag and go explore. Have a position of truth with which you begin and go explore the world. If you come back, your flag might be gone. There's no guarantee your flag is still going to be there. Or you might come back strengthened in believing that your flag is it. But plant your flag for truth and go explore the world.
Like like I like that to a degree. Like I like the exploration. I like the putting your foot forward and giving it a shot and things. Um, I guess one of the reasons I'm platforming you here is I just want to pick your brain about. I mean, like, what about people who read the Bible like you did and they don't believe it? What is your best guess why people think differently?
Sin and unbelief.
But what you had sin and unbelief. Why do you think yours was a different?
I don't know. Except that, as I said earlier, in a way that I can't exhaustively explain, God told me that if you want the details to that process, they're unavailable to me. I went from a non-believer who made fun of Christians to a Bible-believing Christian. But when I was baptized, I would say, even though I read the Bible, I wouldn't say that I knew exactly what I was doing. I jumped in the water, had no real idea what I was doing.
Sure.
In fact, one of the guys that baptized me said, "Do you know what you're doing?" I said, I hope so. I don't know. I mean, I was in the water. I was as ignorant as Christianity as I am today. I don't think that there was any special switch, trick, code that I would tell anybody to replicate my experience and you'd get Jesus. That's not Christianity. I mean, people, if you're familiar at all with Christianity, people have tried to systematize and formulaically put together a path to salvation and simplify the gospel message so that you come to Christ. But I think an oversimplification of the gospel message has led to a lot of stillbirths, if you will, instead of new births, that we have explicated too much out of the gospels and given people an easy believism. And so the minute they encounter trials and tribulations, they leave. The minute it doesn't make sense to them anymore, they leave. I've been tempted by that myself through my struggles and trials myself. I understand and empathize with people who struggle with these things. I talk to atheists all the time. I completely understand why people walk away from Christianity. But why somebody does, David, and why somebody doesn't, it's just the simple answer is sin and unbelief. But of course, I would have to preface that by saying that there's a lot of circumstances and situations in people's lives that are not complete. Your story is not complete. My story is not complete. David, in 20 years, you might be a Christian pastor and I might be an angry old atheist. I don't know. I don't know how Jesus keeps the glue in my life together. And I don't know why other people's lives come unglued. I don't have a simple answer for any of that.
Sure.
I have the biblical answer is, it seems simple, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but my simple answer is sin and unbelief, but that's compounded by everybody else's life and experiences and circumstances.
Are you saying that today David he would have to just plant his flag and give it a shot to believe?
I don't know of anybody else that does it another way.
I mean that's what hypothetically. I mean, when he's talked to a Mormon, when he's talked to a thing. I mean, it takes up a lot of time. I'm just trying to.
It absolutely does. There's again, I get back to our technology, David. What has it accustomed us to expect? I can go to Walmart. I can buy a frozen dinner and be eating it in 3 minutes. We kind of expect I can call somebody, I can order something on Amazon and have it on my front porch in a day. We can download stuff instantly. We can send money to someone halfway across the world in a finger snap. Our technology has created a hurriedness about us, a demand that we have instantaneous and easy solutions to problems that really actually require more like grandma cooking, like crock pot versus microwave. We live in a microwave society that doesn't know anything about grandma's cooking. And grandma's cooking is what I would categorize as a slow food, right? These big questions that are hanging over us are slow food questions. But we are demanding as a society microwave answers, and they're just not going to come that way. You want a simple answer to this? I don't have any. There isn't one. It is a long, slow, laborious, difficult, and time-consuming process. And the fallacy of our age is that we think that we can simplify it or find some simple means to cross the bridge to shorten that effort and time that is required to understand what discipleship in any religion requires. Go live in a Muslim country. Go.
That sounds like
So
such a
what I'm
risk,
saying
though.
is that,
Like, I mean, Today David could have that mentality and had this conversation, and those exact words said by a Hindu who told him to seek out Brahma in that regard. And I mean, he could spend all that time and not be any closer to the truth of what you're saying. Like, what I'm
but
trying
do you want to go? I mean, it seems like I've said it a few times now. It seems like you don't want to explore comparative religions, that you want me to give you an answer aside from the details of Hinduism or Islam. And I can't do that. I mean, if you want me to tell you the differences between why I believe Christianity and not Hinduism or Islam, I can do that, but it doesn't seem that you want me to give you an
it's
answer
just so hard
without that.
because the language is what I'm saying is we're using language like it's personal, it's revealed, it's a personal relationship, but it's not talked about how to get to a specific personal interaction. It's more of, well, these things are wrong, these things don't make sense, and this seems to make the most sense. And that, to me, that just feels like I want to find a way to describe it in a way that people can hey, this is my friend Ted, or like, hey, dude, if you want to see it, look over here. It's tough. I mean,
Well,
why is it so hidden?
Why is what so hidden?
Why is this something that has to be whatever it takes to believe this?
David, if there was $1 billion with your name on it in a suitcase under a rock halfway up Mount Everest, would you go get it?
Sure, if I knew about it.
What would that process involve in getting you from the Carolinas to the foot of Mount Everest?
Like logistics, like I'd have to make a flight, and
what else?
I'd have to get childcare, and I'd have to leave my wife for a while.
What about the culture and the time and the place and the geography where you're going?
I'd have to learn it. I'd have to get some kind of GPS. I'd have to find out the coordinates. I'd have to get.
What about your health?
Travel there.
What about making the hike? Are you fit?
I'd rent a helicopter on credit because I'm going to have a bunch of money.
Helicopter's not going to get you to where your money is. You have to walk there. It's in the dead zone, by the way. Well, my point is there. Thank you for responding as you have. But my point is there that anything worth pursuing, David, is going to require time and effort. Bottom line. I mean, anything that comes easy goes easy. Anything that again, this gets back to my theme of suffering. Anything that is worth the time and the effort, we will do it. It will be a lasting. And so to the question you had mentioned and phrased it in an interesting way, hiddenness. And I just want to comment real quickly that if you know something, or if you assume that something is hidden, the implication of what you're saying is that you know what it would look like if it was out in the open. But I think the process by which we come to know these big questions about God's existence and which God and which religion are like pursuing your $1 billion prize in the dead zone or the death zone of Mount Everest. It's there, you know it's there, you have the coordinates, but you have to make the effort to get up there. That would require a lot of time and energy, but it would pay off. it would pay off in the long run. You'd come back with the money and you and your wife would be set for life with your child in college and everything. You would do it
Like,
because it would, but
I like the
my
imagery.
point
Like, I
is,
mean,
yeah. And I
throw
think
your point out. I
that's
don't
how
want to
I'm
interrupt.
just,
Sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. We're jumping and the screens are cutting off and I
Yeah,
don't
a
hear
little
you.
bit
So
of
I
lag there.
apologize.
Sorry.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I don't know if it is this is the same as what you're saying though, because you are saying that it's out in the open. I mean, you've got stories in the Bible about God interacting in a broad way, and in ways that more than one people are seeing. Or you got personal revelations, like from you said earlier, from Saul to Paul, and you're saying in your personal experience you had a revelation that made it clear to you. That's out in the open. That's broad, but it's not broad and out in the open to everyone, it seems. And it doesn't seem like it's the same playing field, and there's giant consequences here. uh, I don't see how it's the same, and the desire to try to get there is really just try harder whenever other people literally are doing the opposite of trying, and they get some kind of revelation. It doesn't. What are people missing who don't believe? Is there a revelation already there in front of them that they're just ignoring, that we can try to communicate to people? Or is it not there, and that's just the way that God works? And you get what I'm saying?
You said, as you began your question, you said that you seem to think that my analogy wasn't the same.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that I could just go there and get it. Like, it's not actually hidden. I mean, it's just somewhere I have to go to and get. But if I go there and it's not there, I mean, that's proof it wasn't there. But if I go there and it's there, it's proof it's there. But like,
my analogy wasn't proof of money. My analogy was the process to go get it. That was the analogy that I was using. I'm not saying that that God is like a box of money. I'm saying that the process by which we come to know God is like a trip to Everest to acquire a prize. Now, when Edmund Hillary climbed it with his partner back in, I forgot when it was, 50s, he didn't do it with any equipment or, he did it just to make a name for himself. But my analogy was not about proof of God, that God was akin to the money box. It was
I don't
about
want to get hung up on that. I apologize.
making. Okay, I just want to make that clear because it sounded like you were saying I was making the analogy to God's existence. No, I'm just making the analogy.
I was just saying that you were saying that it's not hidden. It's there. You just got to go get it.
Right. So when in the Gospel of Mark, which is pretty simplistically written, Jesus speaks to people in parables. He speaks to people on the outside in parables. He's not unambiguous about speaking to the multitudes in parables. Why does he do that, David? It's to your question. Why does Jesus not speak plainly to everybody? Why does he speak in parables? What is the reason for Jesus speaking to the multitudes in parables in the Gospels?
I imagine it's for things like wisdom for life is complicated and needs to be more of a principle than a list of rules in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. And so he is talking to the crowd, and this is in Mark chapter 4. How shall we picture the kingdom of God, or by what parable shall we represent it? And I'm sure you're familiar. It is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the soil, through it, though it is the smaller than all seeds that are upon the soil, but it grows up and becomes a huge tree. And this is the kingdom of God. This is what it's like in parabolic form, that the word of God is the seed, it's planted, and then it grows. And I'm sure you're familiar with the parable of the seeds, the 4 kinds of responses from the seeds that Jesus speaks about. The seed is the word of God. The sower goes out to sow. Some seed falls on the wayside. It doesn't even take root. Some fall in the cracks, take root, but then wither up because the root doesn't go down deep. Some seeds produce a crop, but it gets choked out by the weeds. And then there are some seeds that go into good soil and produce a fruitful crop. What's the analogy of the parable there?
Okay, that leads me to a question. Um, and this is all hypothetical, and of course you don't know the answer to this. What's your best guess? If other people had the same revelation you had, if the reveal was the same reveal happened to other people, do you think they would be in the same, like, understand it the way that you do now?
I don't know. I have no
Yeah,
idea.
of course you don't. Like, I'm not trying to say like you would know for
Yeah,
sure.
I
Best
again,
guess.
I don't have a tool, a piece of technology. I don't have the epistemic uh, telescope or microscope that gives you the definitive answer, that gives you God in 3 easy steps. I would be a fool to try to present God in this way, or to discern. I mean, David, your story's not done yet. I don't know what's going to happen to you tomorrow.
Like
I don't
with
know.
the
But
analogy of the
let
seeds.
me
Yeah, go ahead.
let me get back to the answer to your question. So I have 3 brothers. 2 of us are Christians, 2 of us aren't. The middle 2 that aren't Christians make fun of the other 2 that are. My youngest brother Don is a pastor. Why are 2 of us? We were not raised in a Christian home. We were not raised. Our father tragically took his own life when I was in high school. Why did 2 of us come to know Jesus and 2 of us still to this day do not? In fact, my middle brother was a Christian for about a year before he became a hardcore atheist. So I have 2 atheist brothers and 1 Christian brother. Why is our family divided like this? No idea.
Great question.
I
Yeah,
absolutely have no idea. And I'm not even going to begin. We have all of the brothers have had their own tragic walk without a dad. And
yeah,
we've all reacted differently to it. But I have no crystal ball into their minds, even though they're my blood relatives. My
yeah.
mom's kind of on the fence agnostic wise. She talks about the Lord, but I don't know where she is in a Christian sense, but her story is not finished either. But the fact of the matter is, I think, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing in our conversation, David, is you wanting to give, is you looking for a particular singular answer that would be definitively the line in the sand between why I believe and why somebody doesn't believe. It
Um,
seems like you're on the hunt for a just give it to me in one sentence kind of thing. You want me to tell you simplistically, the difference between my faith and a million other people's
no,
unbelief or different beliefs. Are
I,
you in
I
search of
am
one kind of thing? It doesn't
not.
seem like you're satisfied with what I'm saying, is what I'm saying.
I'm not necessarily looking for one answer, but I am focusing in that area a lot because to me it's like you dig in those kind of areas, you're more likely to find more nuggets, more useful minerals and stones. I don't think that we find the one answer from people in that regard, but I do think we find more hints of people's experiences in that kind of question right there. I feel like that's just a useful topic to go on to help examine these kind of thoughts here. So I'm not trying to to goat you into some kind of, you either have an answer or you don't have an answer, or
No, I
there's
don't think
one
that.
answer. Yeah.
I'm just
Um,
I'm just hearing you're not satisfied with anything I've shared so far.
it's so like the seed analogy you were saying earlier. Some grow, some fall to the wayside, some are eaten by birds. I apologize if I butchered it.
No,
Um,
no, no.
the um,
I think I have an analogy for you that might help.
Let me finish this thought if you don't mind,
But
and
you finish.
I'll gladly hear that. Yeah. So, do you think that everybody that the seed fell on had the same level of reveal? I mean, you can't obviously know, you're not God, no anything, but like, just based on, if you had to choose an answer, like which one's more likely in your opinion, which one's less likely, um, do you think that the people who were the rocky ground in this analogy, they had the same level of reveal that you had?
Seed is the seed. And if you know the backstory of the parable, Jesus explains it to his disciples. Are you familiar with the 4 explanations that Jesus gives?
Let's definitely hear it for David here.
Okay, so the one that hits the sidewalk doesn't even go down into soil, that the devil snatches away the word, but the word is distributed evenly to all. That's the sower's job. He goes out and he sows by hand. A sower in the ancient world has a handful of seeds and he casts them. So the seeds that land on the concrete, the pavement, those hear the word of God and it's taken away immediately. No root can take. The second kind of seed falls into the cracks of the sidewalk. We've all seen grass growing out of cracks of sidewalks. It's not rooted very deeply, but it does sprout up for a time. But Jesus says as soon as persecution or some trouble arises, they wither and die. The other one is the seed goes into soil. It produces a crop, but it gets choked out by the weeds, and the weeds are the cares of the world. In other words, the person slowly over time transfers the cares of the everyday world, makes those more important than the gospel and everything about Christ. We've all experienced that to some degree. And then there's the final seed that goes into good soil and bears fruit in different levels. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us why some get it, some don't. He just tells us this is the backstory of how people react to the word of God when it is distributed or proclaimed. We don't find out why some hear it and some don't. We're not told those kind of details. But when the word goes out, as God says in Isaiah, that it accomplishes what God wants it to accomplish, not necessarily what we want it to accomplish. My relationship with my mother, I don't talk about religion with her. I haven't for 30 years, pretty much. We started off very antagonistically toward one another when I was baptized at 26. So I just put it in a box and I said, we're not talking about religion with Mom. And just about a year or two ago, she asked me what kind of Bible she should get. Unprompted by me, completely out of the blue, took me by surprise. I had no doing in that, David. Don't know what prompted Mom to do that. Was it my conversation? I haven't had conversations with her. She's seen what I've believed as a Christian. I don't know if that's rubbed off. I don't know. But the point of the matter is that to answer your question, what's that definitive difference between those who bear fruit and those who don't? We're not told, except that God comes to everybody. They get the same reveal, which is the word of God. And some reject it and some accept it. And why that is, we don't know. I don't know anyway. I'll just say I don't know, but God does. But we're not told. We're not told why some. And those that reject it, it doesn't mean that they can't come back around, that God's completely given up on them. But I don't have a reason. I ask for why people reject it. It's there. It's open. It's not secret. It's not a secret religion. It doesn't require any initiation rites. It's wide open. Anybody can go to a bookstore and get one of these and read it and accept it or reject it. Why some do and some don't, I don't know, David. I just don't know. God, I think in that capacity, God remains God. He alone has that knowledge that we'd like to have, but we just don't have it. But the simple answer in the Bible is simply unbelief and sin. Why some people go from sin to salvation? It just seems to be what the scriptures say in Romans 9, that it is by God's choosing and not our own. Salvation belongs to God. Here's the analogy I was thinking of earlier. If you were a billionaire, let's use money again. If you were a billionaire and you distributed your wealth to the poor and unfortunate in your community, and somebody wrote a Facebook post
up a little bit. Can you see if there's anything you can do about that real quick? I don't want to lose your thought there.
All right. It just may be my internet temporarily. Is that all right?
Might be my headphones. I don't know. Anybody else here?
Can you hear me now? I can hear you just fine.
Just go on. It'll come back in. If it comes back in, if I can't understand something, I'll ask you to repeat it.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say you have money to give to people as you desire.
It's my headphones.
To give to. Okay. So you have money that you can give to people. You give it to people, and somebody in your community puts a Facebook post up complaining about how you're being unfair in giving your money out to people. Now, what would that be to you? Would you care that somebody posted on Facebook that you were being unfair in distributing your wealth to people? No, it's your wealth to give to people, isn't it? So here's the unsatisfying answer, and I know it's going to be unsatisfying to people that don't believe, is that according to what I understand from scriptures, and this comes right out of Romans chapter 9, that God's purpose in election stands. That the closest reason that we get in the Bible as to why some people are saved and some people aren't is because of God's decision. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Psalm 3:8, Revelation 7:10. Faith, salvation is a gift. Ephesians 2:8, 9, and 10. And rather than, because here's the thing, David, if Christianity was only available to those who could ruminate and think deeply about these things, you and I, philosophers, scholars, theologians, and scientists, then Christianity would only be limited to those people who had the capacity to do what we're doing right now, who had the wealth, the time, and the leisure to investigate these things and to look at these things carefully over the course of time. A lot of people don't have that leisure. So it would seem that if you weren't academically minded, or if you didn't have the tools and the resources that we take for granted, they wouldn't have a chance of coming to Christianity, because all that stuff would be a kind of prerequisite in order for them to figure out if Christianity were true or not. But there are many people in this world who become Christians without all of those accoutrements that we take for granted in the West.
Sure.
So the gospel is available to everyone in all walks of life: children, infants, adults, the educated, the uneducated. And it's not about human effort. Again, as I said earlier, Christianity is about God coming to man. All other religions are about man trying to make a way to God. And I think that's the distinctive difference in Christianity. It's what I call a terrible mystery. And I don't mean terrible in an awful way, but in a humbling and awe kind of a frightening and sobering kind of a way.
I want to say this, and I don't mean this in like any kind of mocking way.
No, I don't mind.
But
if you warned me ahead of time, that'd be all right.
Yeah. But wouldn't that, with that perspective, 2-day David should just not worry about it at all, and eventually, if he's meant to be, it'll meant to be, and it'll happen?
No. Where did I say that?
Well, you're saying that it's up to God to elect people. It's up to God to call people and to reveal Himself. And for some reason, He can reveal Himself to people and they not believe, but He has to be hidden first. That's a tangent. But that.
You're suggesting that what I'm saying would naturally lead somebody not to look into it?
Well, it just kind of seems like determinism, or just like everything's already set. Like, I mean, if you aren't the one who makes the call, if it's not man's effort, it's God's effort, then I mean, ultimately, you could go on to be a monk. You could go on to be a persecutor of Christians like Saul, and depending on whether God chooses you or not, you're in or not.
What do you mentioned an interesting word there. You mentioned determinism. What can you unpack that so I can better address your question? Because I don't want to assume we're talking about the same thing. What do you mean by determinism?
Let's talk about that another day.
Well, if it does pertain to the question you asked me, and I can answer it, but I need to make sure we're on the same page in terms of what you mean by determinism. In a nutshell, I'm not going to hold you to a dictionary definition.
That the things that happen are going to happen, and you don't really have much of a say in it. Everything's kind of the consequence of the thing before it, and that's the consequence of the thing before it, and that's the consequence of the thing before it. And ultimately, The only person who
But
has true agency in this scenario you're saying is God. God is the only person who actually makes a choice in this case. Because if God doesn't choose you, then you're doomed to be in that natural fallen state.
okay, so you're applying. It sounds like you're applying kind of the law of causality in physics to God. Is that right?
I'm saying he's the only one who doesn't have that in what you're saying. Human
You
beings
said that
are bound to
you.
the world and whatever they and just a quick note here. It's 10:25, and I know you said you had a hard stop at 10:30 my time, and I just want to be respectful of your time.
Oh, that's okay. I can keep going. I don't want to have anybody think I'm dodging you.
No, absolutely, and no problem.
So you're saying that people are like atoms bound by the laws of physics to just do what the physics is determined beforehand to do? Is that what you mean by determinism?
Well, that's one way to look at it, but in the view you're describing here, I mean, on what I'm hearing you say, and I might be misunderstanding, of course, that God is the one who chooses people, and whether or not you're choosing is not your effort, it's God's effort. And so whether or not you can be pious your entire life and intellectually pursuing it your entire life, try to have an open heart, you spend your whole life. If you're not chosen, then it's not you. You're passed over, so to speak. I guess I don't know if that's the term, but you could spend your whole life against the principles of Christianity and literally persecute people like Saul and get a very specific chosen vision that is undeniable, so to speak.
Did you? Okay, so to answer your question briefly, you said you have a son or daughter.
Yep, and yep.
Okay, did you guys have her or your child before or after you left Christianity?
After.
After. And you discussed having children? You wanted to have kids?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What say did your child have in the matter of you wanting to have kids?
They didn't. That's what's the word you used earlier? Like tragic truth or something. Whatever that phrase you used about
a terrible goodness.
Terrible goodness.
Okay, so let me ask you this that I could probably surmise. I've never been married, but your son or daughter exists for a reason. And let's take God out of the equation for just a second. That is it a daughter or a son? I don't want to keep saying son, daughter.
I got both.
Okay, so you have two kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they came into the world because, though they didn't have a choice in the matter, of course,
Mm-hmm.
They came into the world as a result of your love for your wife and your wife's love for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Sure, yeah.
So rather than looking at it deterministically, because you didn't know what kind of kids you were going to have, your children are the product of your love for one another. That they are, despite all the evil and suffering that they might encounter as adults or even as children, that you and your wife determined that it was better for them to have lived and experienced life and the goodness that is life than not to have existed at all.
Yeah.
And even though, so what I'm saying here is I'm trying to sort of deliberately throw a little bit of ambiguity on this idea that we can know the mind of God. And I don't think that we can say that you determined that you were going to have the children that you have now, in specifically as you know them, but that you did determine that you were going to have children. And right off the bat, you've decided that bringing other humans into the world was a good idea, but they didn't have a say in the matter. And so if God doesn't exist, David, that at some point in the lives of your children, when they're suffering, who is ultimately responsible for their experience of suffering?
Well, maybe not ultimately, but in a lot of ways, me and my wife, yeah, bringing them into existence.
and I'm not putting you down for this,
Sure.
because the decision that you and your wife made was basically this, and tell me if I'm wrong, that it was better to have children out of our love for one another than to not have children, despite all the things that they could possibly suffer. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
So you determined to have them, but they are still, as moral agents, in a sense, free to grow up and do and believe whatever they wish, though their existence was predetermined by your love between you
Yeah.
and your wife.
But if I had knowledge beforehand that one of my children was going to live forever with me and the other one was going to suffer eternally, I think I'd be a little hesitant to have the second child, or any, if it meant that I had to have one that suffered eternally.
But you made a conscious decision to bring children into the world that you knew was filled with evil and suffering. And so my point, I think we agree, that the goodness that comes from bringing a life into the world far and away outweighs any kind of suffering that they might encounter. Would you agree with that?
For me, in my circumstance, my wife and I's circumstance, yes. Not everyone's circumstance.
Certainly. But I think I'm trying to paint a picture of your question about determinism. That
But
my
at the same
existence.
time, like, I don't have control over a lot of the world. Like, I can hedge my
Well,
bets
I'm
for
not
my
talking
kids,
about.
but I can't block them from suffering. I can't put I can't. Well, I mean, to certain degrees I can, but I can't, like, potentially block them from all suffering. Potentially give them the best everything of all things. I can do what I can.
So you're not omniscient, is what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah, that's the shorthand version there.
Okay, so what I've attempted to set up here is that you could prevent suffering by not having children. But here's the rub. Again, getting back to my point, you're not omniscient, and yet out of your love, you decided it was better for the children to exist than not to exist. So now when we transfer this idea to an omniscient being, there's a similarity and a parallel. The one is that out of God's love, he creates us. We are the product of God's love and creation, okay? But God is omniscient. We aren't. So as the Christian philosopher Alan Plantinga has said about the logical problem of evil, in a very simple but unsatisfying sense for skeptics, is that God has reasons that we know not of for a multitude of different ways. God not only thinks much differently than we do, he knows a lot more than we do. As David said in Psalm 139, God's thoughts toward us are more than the multitude of grains of sand on the seashore. So God has far more thoughts about us, David, than you do about your children. As much as you love your children, as much as you love your spouse. And by the way, I'm not putting you down for having kids. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to make the argument that God's omniscience and his love far and away and exceeds our own love for our own family and our own children. And God has a multitude of thoughts and good things for us that he has prepared for beforehand for us to walk in them. One of the verses that engendered my Christian experience and launched me into the bathtub was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. This is the root of what I guess led me to get baptized, was trust in the Lord, excuse me, with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Now, this was very attractive to me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Now, I don't do that perfectly, but that is what faith is. For the Bible says in Hebrews 11 that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So faith is going on the fact that what God has revealed is sufficient, that he is omniscient. I don't know everything that he knows, but he has given me sufficient knowledge to act upon it. And so my faith, what I think faith is an act of trust. You bring children into the world as an act of love and trust. And you raise your children to love you and to trust you. And that's, in a sense, why God relates to us as parents, because that's the most intimate relationship that we have as husband, wife, father, son. These are the relationships through which God relates to us. And so it's just an omniscient parent with much more thoughts and a much greater love toward us than we have toward one another and toward our own children. And so to the idea that God has determined what will happen, God knows in Psalm 139, all of our days, they were written before there were any of them. He's done so in love. And what I'm trying to establish is, just like you decided to bring kids into the world, so did God. But unlike you, God knows exactly what's going to happen to us. And he has given us his promise and his plans that he has good work for us to do out of his love and mercy and grace. And so we trust him, even though we don't know omnisciently what he's doing. That's my take on it. It may not be satisfying, but because I don't know. I don't know how an omniscient God knows the future or makes the future or determines the future. I don't know. I just know what Scripture has revealed. So I know that's not satisfying, but
no, I mean it's fine.
It's like Dante says at the end of Paradiso. It's love. You know, we're talking about physics. I talked about physics early. What moves the sun and other stars? If you asked a physicist, they would say gravity.
Mm-hmm.
But Dante was onto something when he said, he ended his Divine Comedy with, "It's love that moves the sun and other stars." And that just seems weird to people. Love moves the sun and other stars? Yes, because God is love, and he created the universe out of love. The creation is an act of God's love. And everything in creation God has declared to be good. And so everything is a reflection, a parable of God's divine love toward us in Christ.
I guess, I mean, here's some of the things that have held me up, that are hard for someone like David here on the outside to understand. So God has all these good plans for us, but at the same time, there's a giant number of people who are destined to not believe he exists, to potentially be. I don't know if you believe in eternal conscience torment or not, but potentially be suffering or potentially be eliminated, and then at the same time you're describing like a parent relationship, but with this parent relationship, it's showing God literally talks to and interacts with some children and then is silent and allows for destruction and death and pain for others without any sort of reprise or any sort of any of the similar type of personal interactions. And so it's just hard for someone on the outside who hasn't experienced it. And that's the thing. Like I believe that people experience things. Like I don't know what those things are, and a lot of times, but at the same time, and as I said before to you, when we talked before this talk, my goal isn't to go out here and like just crush some kind of belief system or anything like that. My goal is to bring about more conversations about. I want to. What is that verse in the Bible? Paul's like, to the Greek I'm Greek, to the Jew I'm a Jew.
Become all things to all men.
Yeah, I want to be all things to all men, and that I want to raise the skepticism, doubts, and make them as clear as possible to the Christian, to the Muslim, to the person with the real right leaning, to the person with the real left leaning things. I want to find the voice of the people who are not in the conversation and try to bring about the most clarity of why there's a divide. And so like, I'm not just trying to grill you to prove you wrong or anything like that. Honestly, my goal is for the audience. My goal is for most people to see to hopefully have these ideas engaged with and wrestled with in a way that's not us mocking each other, not us attacking each other. You've been very respectful, and I've really enjoyed our conversation here in all that regard. So I mean, it's just tough because the objections I hear from other people, the objections that somebody who doesn't have the personal experience, the objections that I might find in myself, like it feels like such a disproportionate amount of experience being divvied out. And I believe you that you had an experience that uh, to you, it is something that is real to you, and it's. I just can't figure out how other people can get there yet.
Okay, you said a lot of things in there. Is there anything specifically you'd like me to hone in on? I respect everything you've said. I just want to make sure that I respond to something that you, just one key thing that you said there.
Whatever like is itching you the most. Let's hear it.
Okay, so you started that segment with a whole lot of people going to hell and mentioned something about eternal conscious torment.
Yeah, I did talk for a while.
That's okay. I'm not putting you down. I'm just kind of sorting through, and if I respond to something, I want to clarify it with you first, of course. So is your understanding that there's a bunch of people that are going to hell? Is that what you're saying?
That appears to be what I'm hearing.
Okay, because I haven't brought up hell yet. So
well, you said at the beginning in your summary of that there's a fallen nature and sin, and there's the punishment that should be done for it. But the Jesus redeemed and took the punishment.
Okay, so I'll touch on that.
I did put a little bit of words in your mouth there. I went a little further, but
that's fair. I mean, I alluded to it. There has to be some kind of punishment involved, if you will. Let's take a step back and say that a lot of skeptics will object to I'll put it in scare quotes, atrocities in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that God is kind of like the lunar surface. The Old Testament God is like the lunar surface, and man is like a naked astronaut running around in craters. What's going to happen to a naked astronaut on the moon, David?
Well, it'd probably die in the vacuum of space.
It would be, exactly. It would die rather violently too. It would be kind of bloody, right? That an astronaut would walk around on the moon, land on the moon, take off a spacesuit, and go bodysuiting down a crater in the buff. He wouldn't last 30 seconds, right? It would be awful, wouldn't it? So God in the Old Testament, for a lot of atheists, looks like the lunar surface to a naked astronaut. Clear analogy enough? Makes sense? Would you agree?
Sure.
As a skeptic, that God is a bloody, violent, egotistical, genocidal maniac.
At times.
Okay, so I will get you to concede in that regard. Do you think personally that the events as described in the Old Testament, those atrocities, actually happened as described?
It would be difficult to believe some of them.
Let's just do a thought experiment. Let's say they did happen, okay? That God is really that vengeful the way atheists say that he is. He really exists and he really did those things, and God is really terrible and he's a genocidal maniac. Let's say all that's true. David, you had your own court of law in the ancient Near East. And this God came down in the form of a person and stood in your courts, and you had complete jurisdiction over him. What would you do to him for all his alleged crimes against humanity?
Equal punishment to the amount of pain he caused, maybe like 10% interest.
Okay. Well, sir, you have just described what happened at Calvary.
If Calvary did that, first off, do you believe in hell? Do you believe hell?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So if hell exists, this is the gist of it. So we're willing to put Yahweh there. that he should go there. He made that place. Look at all the things he did against humanity. That seems like a fitting punishment for him, right?
I'll be completely honest. My eyes got caught by something, and I need you to repeat that.
Okay, so would hell be a fitting punishment for the God of the Old Testament?
No.
It wouldn't be enough.
No. Well, no. I mean, it'd be too much if it's eternal.
Why would it be too much?
Unless he got to send.
He is
people to hell.
eternal. He's eternal, so it would have to be eternal. You can't snuff out an eternal being, but you can make him suffer forever. Would that be fitting?
If you suffer forever, and there's no change to that, does that mean that that's just existence?
Well, if God is so horrible, the God of the Old Testament is so horrible for what he did in wiping out civilizations and allowing slavery and doing all kinds of other evil things, is hell a fitting punishment for that kind of being or not? Do you think?
That doesn't fit to what I said. I mean, I'd want equal to what he did plus a little interest. Unless you're saying that he sent people to hell in the Old Testament.
Well,
then I guess he'd have to have
God is the same
on infinite times infinite.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that yes, that there's Sheol and death. Now, hell isn't as developed in the Old Testament as it is in the New, but it has always existed for the devil primarily. But the crimes against humanity that God is allegedly guilty of, and even including sending people to hell, that God himself should go to hell.
Yeah, but God's supposed to be everywhere in all places at once.
Yeah, but I'm giving you jurisdiction. Your human court of law has complete jurisdiction, and this is exactly what Jesus said to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate says, "Don't you know I have authority to release you or to crucify you?" Do you know what Jesus' response was? "You would have no authority over me unless it had first been given to you from above." So I'm giving you all governmental authority over Yahweh, David, to punish him for everything that he did in the Old Testament. Would you go through with it? Would you pull the switch? Would you pull the trigger? Would you send him there?
If he was sending people to hell in the Old Testament, then yes. If it was just the finite number of people that he killed and commands he gave, then I mean there would be a finite punishment for that.
So we agree completely that there needs to be punishment for eternal crimes that are eternal.
Sure. And you're saying that people create eternal
I'm not
crimes?
It's not a trick. I'm trying to be if I'm not clear, please. I don't want to make you agree to something you're not clear about. If you commit a crime, let's reverse this now. Let's back up and put it into biblical terms.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If you offend an eternal God, what does that say about the offense itself? So in other words, if you hear a news story and some Joe gets the death penalty, but you don't know what he did, the news story doesn't tell you so-and-so got put to death the other day in the Texas State Penitentiary, injection, whatever, but the story doesn't tell you what he did. What are you going to assume about his crime if he's being put to death? What can we safely assume about his crime if he's being put to death?
It was heinous enough.
It was terrible. It was terrible. Now, what would his crime have been? Against the government, against another human being? Maybe he killed somebody. Probably murder was involved, right? We would agree with that. Maybe that the death penalty usually comes about as the result of a murder or several murders. But it would be heinous. It would be against...
This is still a finite punishment, though. I mean, you have one life you can take.
And I mean, an eye for an eye. You agree with that eye for an eye principle at the very least is what I'm establishing. That if you take, if you take a life, right. So, but here's the biblical foundation of that. What is the transgression of the Mosaic law that is given to Israel in Exodus 19 and 20? What's the penalty for in James 2:10? That, again, just basically, what is the penalty? Who are you offending when you violate the law that God has given to us?
Hmm. So in this scenario, you're saying you're offending God.
We are. We are.
But why does God care? Honestly, like, I mean, if He's infinite, does it not affect Him in any? It really doesn't affect Him in any way.
It
How does God
does.
be all everything and
It does
infinite?
affect him the same way, in a very similar manner, because he's a relational being and God is love. The same way, on a much different scale, but in a similar way, in which you would be shocked, horrified that one of your children committed some kind of crime. They would say, what does dad and mom matter? It doesn't matter. They don't care what I do. It doesn't matter. I'm not living at home anymore. As parents who love your children, even if they did something as an adult, you would be horrified and sickened by it because you love them. This is not just a matter of they broke my rules. This is a matter of a violation of a deep love that God has for us. He's not just giving us a set of rules and testing us. This is his love for us. So when your kids are toddlers, you have simple rules around the house. One of them, I'm sure, is don't touch the stove, right? That they're young, they're not old enough to, I don't know how old they are, I'm just using an analogy.
Sure.
That a basic household rule is that don't touch the stove. Why? What's the underlying principle of that rule, David? Your love for your children and their safety. You want their safety because you love them. Okay, so now they grow up, they become adults, they can touch the stove, can't they? Why can they touch the stove? Because they've grown in the knowledge of what stoves are, and they've grown responsible and have adapted to a mature lifestyle, which they know they can now touch the stove. Does that mean, David, that your love for your child has changed? The rule has changed, but your love for them stays the same, correct? That same love you had for them when they were 3 is the same love that you have for them when they're 33. So the rule, what I'm saying is that the law of the household is laid down, not for you to be a cruel dad, even though your toddler goes, I want to touch the stove, and they think you're an ogre.
That feels more like a restriction than a punishment.
Well, I'm not, well, hold on. But what if, I'm getting to the punishment part. What if your daughter just looks at you and goes, I'm touching the stove, Dad. And you know kids can do that too. I'm going to touch the stove. And they just go, they touch the stove. And it's operational defiance. You just look at them and go, what are you going to do? You're going to punish them out of love for them and their future safety. You want them to be obedient to rules that govern their safety. Now, you're not going to be cruel, but you are going to enact some kind of justice for their disobedience. But you're just an earthly parent. You're not going to kill them for touching the stove. But now, what's at stake with Christianity is that a God of infinite love and mercy has given us guidelines, rules, for our own safety out of his concern and his love for us. Imagine that you drive up to a street corner and you give a homeless man 2 $100 bills. He looks at you right in the eye, takes your money out of the window, and tears them up right in your face and throws the money out to the wind. What would you think? What would be your reaction? You would be indignant. You'd be like, what did you just do? So God is offering us his love and his mercy and his compassion through Christ. But humanity, I'll finish here. But the point of it is that the offense against God isn't just touching the stove. It's basically humanity's middle finger at their creator who is offering them these things. So the punishment that is enacted for rejecting Christ, not just the law, but for rejecting Jesus, is a crime that it's more heinous than any kind of murder or death or any heinous kind of crime. You can even say Hitler. It's heinous because it is offense against a holy God. Let's get back to the naked astronomer, or the naked astronaut. It's like, what would you expect? God's holiness is like the surface of the moon. But we're a bunch of human beings running around naked, mad at God because we can't run around on the moon naked because we're going to die. Well, the moon never changed. We're the ones that took off our suits and said party time. But God's wrath, God is a holy God, and he can't be in the presence of sin. So he has to do something about that. If we reject his offer of love in Christ, then eternal punishment, because he is an eternal being, is the only thing that is just and right. It's terrible, it's frightening, it's scary, and it's awful. But the rejection, the willful rejection of God's offer of salvation through Jesus will merit eternal consequences. Absolutely.
And let me ask you this. What does it mean to accept it?
Salvation from eternal death,
Like
a second death.
how do you do it?
Jesus has already done it. There's nothing that you can do it. What the thing that is in operation for the human being is to turn from their sin to Christ. That's called repentance. The recognition. So when Peter preaches his sermon in Acts, the Bible says these 3,000 people were cut to the heart, convicted of their sin about what they did to Jesus. And they said, "Men, what should we do?" Peter says, "Repent and be baptized for the remission of sins in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ." Repentance is the only acceptable response to God's offer of salvation. And once you turn, it just means turning, just like a planet turns from light to darkness, repenting of our unbelief, repenting of our anger, repenting of our refusal to obey, repenting of the sin that so easily ensnares us, the repenting of our guilt, confessing all of this, coming to Jesus with our burdens, as Matthew 11 says. So
for David, and maybe children even, who hasn't had a chance to really make those kind of things, and there's not a sense of conviction. Is that is not being aware or not feeling the conviction or not acknowledging it, rejecting it?
Well, it's not a feeling. I as a believer for 30 years, David, I can say sometimes I get up in the morning, I don't feel saved. I abandon the idea that my faith is based on a feeling.
So it's
the
not
conviction,
a feeling, it's not a thought,
it's not
process.
a feeling. No, it's a matter of right and wrong, truth, and it's a matter of recognizing. I lost my father when I was very young, so I don't know what fatherly love is like. I've struggled and stumbled for 30 years to understand the parent-child relationship because my relationship with my father was terrible. It wasn't always terrible, but before the end of his life, it was pretty bad. We had a terrible relationship. So I've struggled all my life to understand God as a heavenly father. I say father, and I kind of freak out, I'm like, I don't know what it's like to be a loving dad. You have something in your life that I've never had or never experienced with loving children. So I've struggled with that, David. I've struggled with understanding that is my faith just a feeling? No, it's a matter of, like, the stars are going to be out, whether or not the clouds block them or not. That God's faithfulness remains, even though I can't see it, feel it, or hear it. And I think that that dark night of the soul is one of the ways that I've suffered, if you will, and suffered through seeing God remaining faithful when I don't have any faith, if you will, when my faith is empty. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to think about everything I've said to you and regret probably 90% of what I've said.
No, come on.
Because I'm an introvert and I think twice about what I say, how I say it, how I come across to people. And I'm like, oh, what did I do? Why didn't I say this? So, I just say all this as candidly as I can.
If it's any comfort. If it's any comfort,
well, we all do it.
Extroverts do it too.
Yes, we're all human. So the idea of, like I said, it's to me, the conviction has come over time gradually, like the rising and the setting of the sun. And some days I'm terrified of my sin. Some days I'm like, it's all right. God's got me. But I think the point I've been trying to make for the last half hour is that we don't think that our sin is really that bad. So a lot of people will go, oh, well, God tortures people, or how evil that God is for sending people to hell. That whole thing I was trying to explain. Really what it is, David, is our problem is that you and I, and I'm saying this as Christians, non-Christians, anybody, we don't look at the crimes. We don't look at our sin. We don't look at what's wrong with us with many degrees of severity. We're like, it's no big deal. Because that's our nature, we tend to blow it off, right? It's easy to see the wrong in other people, isn't it? Whether it doesn't matter if you're religious or not, right? It's fun to gossip and to call out other people for the wrongs that they've done. It's really easy to do that. Hey, that's why one of the reasons I confess I had to step back from street epistemology before it got personal. Well, it started to get personal, but I didn't want to get personal with anybody. And so I had to back off, and I still have a problem with that. I've said to many people, I still have a problem with making it a personal thing. So I back off because I don't want to do that. But we tend to go after people tooth and nail without recognizing the problems in our own lives. And we minimize our own sin. You can call it something else if you don't believe in it's sin, but there's something wrong with us. And we minimize that. If I were to ask you, David, do you consider yourself a good person? I'm not putting you on the spot. This is a rhetorical question.
Yeah, sure.
But if I ask you that question, you would respond in some way, I think, positively. You would say, I'm a good person. And you might cite 3 or 4 things that you do or don't do that would justify your decision. Would you agree?
I don't know. Growing up, my uncles would always ask me how tall I am, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm 5'4" at the time," and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know they stack crap that high."
Oh, gosh, that's horrible.
I know that was a good joke, though.
That's good.
Fun.
Yeah. But if I
No,
say you're generally a good person,
yeah.
What would you say? Why were you? I mean, do you consider yourself generally a good person, or you think, oh, I'm kind of screwed up?
Oh, I mean, I think I'm inherently self-preserving to a large degree, but at the same time, I've found more use and meaning in life, having more interpersonal connections, having trust with the people around me, having a sense of community that isn't distrustful of me. I tend to think that if I've had good experiences in my life where people were caring to me, and I think, oh, it'd be nice if I think other people would have a better life if I did good things to them, and then it's more likely they're going to be in a better mood and a better disposition too. And so, I mean, that makes my life better ultimately. So, like, in some ways, I feel like I'm a good person, but it ultimately, if you were to break it all down, I mean, I'm probably self-seeking. I mean, just self-preserving. But
So you agree that there's an aspect to your nature that is you say self-preserving, or maybe self-centered to some degree. I'm not. Do you think that's an accurate?
I'm
self-centered.
Sure, yeah. If it came down to it, and it was, yeah.
I'm right there with you. I'm not trying to put you like me versus you. I'm selfish. I'm self-centered. I struggle with all that kind of stuff. Do you think, David, it's the stuff that you do that makes you good, or are you by nature good?
I don't think I'm by nature good. I think it's very circumstantial to the fact that I live in a circumstance at which I'm not in a super hostile environment. I have most of my needs met at a very more easy method. I had parents that were reasonably stable. I grew up in a reasonably stable environment. If I were to grow up in a scenario which everyone I tried to trust would burn me, then I would be much more likely to not care about truth. I'd be more likely to try to burn other people. If I grew up in a scenario in which I didn't feel safe where I was at, I'd probably be more distrusting of people, and I would likely not feel like it's worth involving myself in other people's lives. A lot of it's circumstance that makes me me.
So, but there's something. Would it be fair to say there's something gnawing at you that prevents you from saying? Would you think that there's something wrong with you at some point? I will just say that yes, there's something wrong with me. I'm wondering, in your position, do you think that there's something wrong with you?
It depends on what context you're looking at. Like, I mean, wrong with
like,
me.
It's
only by if you compare me. You can only say something's wrong with me if you're putting a measuring stick up that is based on
correct.
Something. And
correct.
If we're just talking about general life, I mean, there is no measuring stick whether or not I'm right or wrong, other than the people that I interact with, the physical world that I have interact with. if you're talking about a metaphysical, am I right or wrong on the grand cosmos, Scott? I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. But you would agree that we would need a plumb line or a standard of measuring to evaluate. That's really all I was getting at.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the context is. Like I was saying, like if we're playing chess, I mean, you've got a plumb line to say, this move is better than this move if you're trying to reach this goal. It's all about having a goal.
But like just to get back to earlier what we were saying about the death penalty, is we'd need somebody would need a plumb line to determine that the act of murder would be wrong, that kind of thing.
Sure. Are you? Is this just going to go around to God is?
No, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to start a rat wheel. Just to say that it seemed earlier that you did agree the crime should fit the punishment should fit the crime. That's all I'm getting at.
Sure, and that's on the basic of general. Yeah, I mean that does end up. There is a lot of fun conversations to be had in a materialist worldview. I mean, you got to understand what is consciousness, what is are animals conscious in a certain way. There's a lot of good questions to be had here, and I do not pretend that it is simplified and easy, but I do not fully understand how it is solved by just adding a bigger stick at the top. Ultimately, it just kind of comes down to that's just another context being put in place. So, I mean, and then we still got to figure out everything else anyway. So, which is a super vague answer. It's a very big topic, and it's 11 o'clock. And I think I'm going to try to wrap it up here.
Sure.
So maybe you want to take 5 or 10 minutes to ask me any questions you have for me that I'll get you out of the hot seat, so to speak. David will go to bed. You can just you can ask me anything you need, or you want to plug any of your stuff. I'll give you a few minutes to whatever's on your mind.
Well, it's appreciate you having me, and it's been a great conversation. I thank you for your cordiality and good questions. I'd invite you to, at some point when we start back up next year, check out our Atheist and Christian Book Club. It's on YouTube. Under that name, you can find it. All of our past videos of clubs, we have authors, great authors, both atheists and Christians.
Nice.
And something for everybody, something I've been doing for about 6 years now. I totally recommend it if you love these kind of dialogues, which I do. Great way to develop friends with people on the other side, a little bit alternative to street epistemology. It's we have developed friendships over the years with the people that come to our club, atheists and Christians. Bill, our co-founder, is the atheist, Bill Cluck. He and I consider Bill a very good friend, but he's a crazy unbeliever. So I love, and my atheist book club in Dallas, I love it. These wonderful people. So I highly encourage these kind of dialogues. Appreciate that the good that can come out of these kinds of things with street epistemology. I don't think all people who practice street epistemology are in it to necessarily deconvert people, but so I appreciate the opportunities to take advantage of that civility. So thanks for having me on the channel, David, and for the conversation, and thanks a lot for giving me only 5 minutes to ask you questions, man. I'm kidding. That was intentional.
Yeah.
I'm only going to leave him 5 minutes to ask me questions, and then I'm going to go to bed.
No, I love it.
Nathan Ferguson did that to me. Nathan Ferguson did that to me a couple of years ago too. Yes. Any questions you want to ask me? We got about 2 minutes here. If you have any questions,
yeah.
But I will ask you one question, and you don't have to give it to me an exhaustive answer. And I said, right now, David, where you stand, this can be just rhetorical or something that you can send me in an email at some point. But what do you think? Who do you say that Jesus of Nazareth is? I know it might be a long answer. I asked Nate that too, not Nate, but Nathan Ferguson. So I'm not demanding that you give me an encyclopedic knowledge. You could even say, hey, I'll think about it and get back to you. Maybe we can have a future conversation about that, but that's my only question for you.
Yeah. Maybe we can chat about that here in a bit. but I think the short answer at this stage is an inspirational person who had a lot of uh, legends develop and inspires millions of people to to think critically of their lives, to examine what they're doing, to try to do good in some ways. Um, I think there is a lot of beautiful poetry around it, and that's one of the things I was going to say about you specifically. Is that I think you have a good. Uh, I think you understand the usefulness and the beauty of poetry. I think that uh, descriptiveness and like your videos, you got a really good job of building a feel and a sound design. Like you're an experiential type presenter, and I get that, and I appreciate that about you. Like I think that whether or not we all understand the same things or come to the same conclusion on things, I think we can speak to each other in that kind of language, that poetic language. I think there's value in that. I think there's value in the a lot of the parables and stories of Jesus uh, and some other religious stuff. Like I think there's life changing perspectives that can be taken from these things. I just find it difficult for people who aren't either brought up in the right place or given the specific uh, revelation or reveal to get to the same spot that you're at. And so I hope that we can continue to talk about concepts. I hope that we continue to talk about poetry, about life-changing mentalities, about trying to be better people, about trying to make the world better, about trying to have more deeper interactions and closer bonds with our people around us. So I think we can agree on those things. I don't think we disagree on those things. I just think that there's a certain amount of direction that you see that I don't, that's pushing things in a specific direction, and I'm just trying to figure out how to, for today and for anyone else who's on the outside, to get that part of it too.
Mm-hmm. It's not easy.
Yeah, agreed.
It's not easy. All right, man. Go to bed.
All right. I appreciate you, Daniel. You take it easy.
All right. You too, man. Stay in touch.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks to everyone who has stayed and watched through this live stream. I am absolutely flooded with endorphins and dopamine by the thought of interacting with these ideas with people, about trying to take these concepts and make them accessible to more people. I am still stuttering over my words and still trembling over. And I have a screen right up here. And so if it ever looks like I was rolling my eyes, it's because ADHD is fun and it is hard to concentrate. But if you let me know how you felt after listening to the conversation, do you feel as though I was asking the kind of questions that would help someone on the outside get to where Daniel was at? Do you feel as though Daniel has given good answers to help somebody potentially, maybe not like a 1-for-1 answer, but maybe playing a note or a chord that strikes with you, that kind of helps it make a little more sense for you? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And if you have a belief or a thought that you wish more people also believed or think, and you want to chat about it with me and Today David here and help him understand, reach out to me. My email is in the about section, and I'm on Instagram, and one day I'll start actually uploading TikToks. So thank you so much for your time, everybody, and have a good night.